Good evening, everybody. Welcome back at last to the Silmarillion Film Project after our long hiatus this fall. Happy Halloween, everybody, and it is time to jump back into things. Episode 5 tonight. I'm joined, as always, by Nick and Marie from our writer's room, and tonight also joined by Alana Mushin again. Alana, who wrote the script for episode 5, which we're going to be discussing here this evening. So, looking forward. So, episode 5, we're starting to muster things, moving towards the battle. Fingon and Maedhros are initiating, just to recontextualize things for folks, right? Fingon and Maedhros are on the first step of the Rally the Troops tour, which is Dorloman, which is a pretty easy sell as far as the Union of Maedhros is concerned, right? But we're starting locally and with a low impact pitch to the Lord of Dorloman. So that's the sort of the broader context. And of course, we've just gotten Húrin and Morwen married, and they're still trying to figure that out in this episode, which is another big part of what's going on, along with the death of Emeldir, right? And so that's a major transition for Morwen as well, which plays into that. But of course, the central story of this episode is the plot line I'm really excited about for this. Probably my favorite plot line from this whole season is Galadriel and in the Empire of Bree. So we're going to be looking at Galadriel's diplomacy work in the palace of the Emperor on top of that hill. I loved the scene where they're looking around, at the landmarks from Bree Hill. Like, it's awesome. Anyway, so we'll be discussing all three of those plot lines as we move forward. As you see, we're not really close to battle yet, but things are brewing more. We still actually have a good deal of time to pass. There's still several years before we get to the battle, but many of the major pieces are starting to fall into place here.
We do get a main character, a named character death. In this episode.
Character death, yes, exactly, and perhaps the only named character who will die in bed in this season. Lots of character deaths, few of them happening comparatively peacefully. Not totally peacefully, but comparatively peacefully.
I say she's not the only one who's going to die in a bedroom.
No
woman in this season.
Right, that's true. We will get one other. We will get another. All right. So anyway, quick announcements before we begin. We are near the very end of the fall moot season. There is one more moot, regional moot left this fall. Carolina moot next weekend. We're heading down into Marie and to you and Nick's part of the country here. We're going to be in High Point, North Carolina next weekend on November 9th. And then we have a little sort of year-end hiatus. Our next moot after that will be Osmoot down in Melbourne, Australia. Ilana, really looking forward to that.
Wait.
yeah. Very excited for Melbourne. In January, and that of course will be the beginning of our spring moot season, which will go through Sunshine Moot, and we've got Tex Moot, we've got Willow Moot over in Belgium, another European moot that's happening at the end of April, and there are several others that are still in process that we're trying to firm up. We're trying to secure a date for SoCal Moot to get back to the San Diego area. We're trying to finalize details for Stampede Moot, which would be in Calgary, Alberta. So we're looking to get back up into Canada. So yeah, lots of and there's also still the dream that we'll be able to do Mountain Moot again out in Denver. So lots of things happening, lots of things still brewing. But we're we're nearing, as I say, the end of the fall period. The second thing briefly that I wanted to announce is I wanted to encourage folks to look into, because it starts in November next week, the new space module that Sarah Brown and James Tauber and I are collaborating on, which is on Tolkien's collected poetry. So I'm preparing to do a lecture in November on Tolkien's first ever published poem. That is the mock epic poem where he took an epic poem about a Roman battle and did a parody of it describing their rugby game at King Edward's School. And along with which he pretended was a found poem and wrote an apparatus for it as well to some extent. So anyway, lots of really interesting stuff. And the first thing ever published by Tolkien, I think, in the school publication, but nevertheless, his first published poem. Anyway, so that's what I'm going to be talking about in November, and Sarah and James are going to be covering a bunch of the other early poems. We're going to, I think, in this first month, we're planning to go up through, but not including Goblin Feet, basically. So the early stuff from his early life.
Waiting for my edition to arrive.
Yep. No, it's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing, and I know I'm even now I haven't really had time to sit through and spend the time with the collection that I would want to. But looking forward to discussing it with folks. All right. So those are my two announcements for today. Let us move on as I glance lingeringly at the map as always.
Actually, a significant part of this episode is not on the map.
It's not on the map, right? Yeah, exactly. It was funny. I had to reorient myself with the reference to you rule everything between the mountains, and I'm like, wait, which mountains again? Oh yeah, that's right. Between the Misty Mountains and the Blue Mountain. We're in Eriador, right.
I love that it's kind of a reference to between the mountains and the sea.
Yes, exactly.
But the sea isn't that close yet.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Soon it will be between the mountains and the sea. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just between the mountains right now.
just between the mountains. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, that was fun. And I'm thinking about, I assume that from here, Fingon and Maedhros they're gonna cross the mountains in one of the passes out of Dorloman there, and head south from there, presumably. It's kind of where the I mean, there's not a rush because we've got time.
I don't think we see them do that. We see other people do that, but I think they have already done that by the time we re-engage.
We don't
with the
even
story.
see them leaving the town.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you mentioned the time scale. Currently, we're about 7 to 8 years before the Nernice,
Mm-hmm.
and the next time we revisit these people will be at our summit meeting,
Right.
And that's going to be 3 years in the future,
Right.
or 3 or 4 years from now. So people will have moved a lot
Right.
in between the episodes.
Yeah. No, there's certainly plenty. It's kind of nice, actually, to have all of this luxurious amount of time for travel. Sometimes we've had to be careful about that, and be thinking about that.
But not this time.
Not this time.
We definitely did not spend an inordinate amount of time talking about travel for the next episode, for sure.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that.
Well, see that we had to coordinate a bunch of different people all arriving at the same place at the same time.
That's
So we maybe
a different
planned the
situation.
logistics and then said, okay, so we'll just start with them all there anyway.
Right. Plan the logistics and then make the calculated decision to wave your hands at it and just do the dramatically sensible
They've got
thing.
plenty of time to get there.
Yeah. Plenty of time. All right. So the episode is called Sooth Beredin. Sooth Beredin, which is the name of the city, right?
It's the name of. I've kept it vague,
Right.
and we can decide. It's yes, it's clearly used for the city, but it seems to be sort of a stand-in for the. Given that the emperor lives there,
right. It's like Sooth Beredin with the capital
Yeah.
at Sooth Beredin City, basically, kind of essentially.
yeah.
Right.
I mean that's kind of how I was thinking of it, and that's a name that Herengel suggested. He suggested a number of them, and I quite like the sound of this one. And it's actually a mixed language collocation. So the Sooth comes from Proto-Eldarin, and that pertains to like a town or a.
Okay.
And then the Beredin is Proto-Indo-European.
Nice.
Well, it's derivative of Proto-European, and that's a hill type word.
Okay.
I was going to say, because it definitely sounds a little bit like it's related to Barrow Downs in some way.
Beredin has that, yeah.
But that Bered could become Bree down the track.
Right.
Yeah.
If you wanted to, like,
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So thank you. I am a linguist in my day job, which means I'm very nervous about linguistic invention. So I quite like it when somebody else in the community comes and just helps out there.
Well, I'm glad we got some Proto-Indo-European in there. Tolkien would approve.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you got to think he would enjoy that.
Yeah.
Though, you know, I don't doubt he would appreciate it, and then he'd be like, but actually, you know,
he would have notes. He
Right.
would definitely have notes.
Yes.
I imagine he would give it the Gandalf treatment, like, because my understanding is that while Gandalf originally was coming from the Old Norse, meaning Gandalf, Wand Elf,
yeah.
but then he created an alternative origin for the name that I think was like more like old man or something like that. I remember that part I am less clear on, but I do remember.
It's always fun when Tolkien either invents or adopts a name, and then later on laboriously devises an etymology for it, you know, to make it fit. Like I'm not going to change the name, but I'll change the whole rest of the language if I have to make it fit in that language. You know, like we see him do. Gandalf is a pretty clear example, I think. I mean, like that's the name of that was the wizard's name after it was the dwarf's name, of course. But eventually, like before The Hobbit was published, that's the wizard's name. So anyway, yeah. Or even, of course, the eventual etymology of Hobbit, right, that he devised, right, is another sort of simple example of that.
I remember vividly reading the Poetic Edda for the first time and coming across names and being like, wait, he just took all these names.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, the Sooth, I liked the idea of having a Proto-Elvish.
Yes, that's really fun.
On it because, you know, Tolkien talks about the Avari and early humans interacting, and it kind of made sense that there would be some vestige there.
Yeah. No, and it was a fun reminder of that too, when the Emperor speaks of the elves, like the elves that they know of, right, to Galadriel, and she's like, well, you know, I'm not sure exactly about the elves that you know, like when he's saying about you elves, and she's like, well, I don't actually know the elves that you've met, but it's possible they probably do live in the forest actually. And yeah, so I mean that was kind of fun.
I mean, Galadriel probably knows some of them,
right? Probably.
Yeah. I was halfway through writing this plot line before I realized this was the kind of analog of the last episode I wrote, which was the Húrin and Hundir in Gondolin, where you have the humans in Elfland, and this is the elf and human land, actually in both plot lines, because you've got Fingon and Maedhros in Dorlopen as well. So I mean, I didn't want to lean too heavily into that, but I was sort of again trying to play with the kind of cross-cultural perspectives on things.
Yeah. No, there were a lot of really interesting things about that. All right, well, so let's jump straight into further discussion then of the Galadriel and Bree land plot. Okay. Is there anything that you guys would want to emphasize about before I dig in and start asking questions?
I feel like it would be more useful for you to start asking questions, because we did a fair amount of world building to kind of create this plot line, and then we went ahead and did even more to get us to where we are now. So I feel like it would be most useful for you to start asking questions.
This is complete. I mean, this is an episode where in both plot lines, this is 100% us.
Right.
There isn't even a sentence in the Silmarillion that corresponds to this.
Nope. Nothing.
So,
nothing at all.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, exactly. The C plot is in the midst of that, stuff that Tolkien gestures at in a single sentence, right? When talks, that where, in fact, 2/3 of the season, right, of season 7 is summarized in one sentence, like when he talks about the formation of the Union of Mithras, right? Which we get exceptionally briefly.
And then in the Easterlings just come over the mountains.
Yeah.
And this is how they did. So it's completely new.
Exactly. How and why, and
they had to invent a new civilization over the mountains too.
Yes.
So a lot of discussion about that.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the meeting between Ibang is how you're pronouncing it?
Yeah, Ibang.
Ibang.
I kind of have a soft spot for names beginning with I.
Yes.
But that again was a Herengel invention, and I thought it sounded good.
Yeah.
And it kind of it rhymed with Ulfang a bit, and I thought that works.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting actually how it almost recontextualizes Ulfang, right? Because it's hard to not see, as an English speaker, it's hard not to see the Fang part of Ulfang, right? And to be thinking about fangs. But then when you see but then when you see Ibang, then you're like, okay, hang on, wait. Now the ANG is kind of becomes a thing on its own, right? And so now it kind of, as I said, it changed how I was looking at them. Now instead of thinking of Ulfang, I was thinking of Ulfang, like Ibang,
which I think is more proper.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the name Ulfang just means ugly beard, so it So it is Fang, Fang.
Yeah, because it's Uldur and Ulfas. So you're correct. Yeah,
but these are clearly all names that were given after the fact in the histories because they're the traitors.
Right, exactly. I doubt his mama named him Ugly Beard. Yeah,
exactly. So, so either the name has a totally different meaning in his own culture, or that wasn't his name. So we're going with his name has a totally different meaning in his own culture.
You're going with the Orthonc solution, basically? Yeah.
Well, what's most likely true is that what we're getting, Ulfang, is a transliteration of his actual name from his own culture, and then given an elvish meaning that seems like it fits.
Right. Especially retroactively when they've become the bad guys. Yeah.
Yeah. When my name, my given name and surname have been transliterated into Chinese, which has happened, people have endeavored to do it in a way that seems right, rather than just calling me Nike, which is what they call Nike.
Right.
So
Ibang, yes, so he's got a litter and he's got people carrying him, but they're not slaves.
Yes.
That was
we had a lot of discussion about that.
Yes, okay. So they're soldiers, and it's like just they're rostered on to be the litter bearers this time, kind of.
They're part of his bodyguard.
So I liked the fact that on the one hand there was clearly there was plenty of scope for uncertainty and discomfort, especially of course Galadriel is uncomfortable, right, and expressing concern about like how corrupt are these people, like is this, you know, what do we know about them, are they all, you know, and but I liked the fact that it wasn't obvious, right? Like there was, I mean, I as you say, if like his, you know, litter were being born by like slaves with their tongues cut out who are being whipped, right? Like it would have been pretty clear to read, right, what we were dealing with here. But it's not like, you know, but at the same time, it definitely feels different from like Dorloman, right? That juxtaposition was a really interesting thing in this episode, right? The two, as you say, it's not I didn't even notice, but you're right, of course, about the elf immersion in human society in both of the major plots. But I was thinking about the juxtaposition of the Dorloman society and the Sooth-Beredin society, which is...
I mean, these guys have got to be good guys for us at the moment.
Right.
I mean,
right. And they have to be plausibly good guys. And not just plausibly in the sense of like, they keep their evil well concealed, like, but like genuinely could go either direction, essentially.
Yeah. Right. We wanted there to be questions,
right,
about things, but not to display a level of corruption that meant, well, of course these are the villains.
Right.
Like, what did you think was going to happen?
Right.
What wasn't where we wanted to be. So there has to be things about their culture that is admirable and good and not corrupt. And then questions of what about these other things going on? What does that mean in a greater context? And how can we eventually corrupt them to the point to be the Easterlings who will occupy Dorloman? And how is that going to look different from this culture that we met here? Like there has to be a fall from where we start now.
Right.
So we don't really, I mean, what I was hoping is that we come out of this episode not really knowing what to make of Ulfang.
Right.
Rumors about him, but like that's all we know. And he's skeptical of Galadriel.
Yeah.
But that's all we kind of know about him at this point. We have no reason to believe that he's bad, but we don't really know. And we've only just met Uldor and don't know much about him either. So it's really not clear.
Right.
This is arguably the most historically realistic culture that we depict in probably our entire show. You know, and we've endeavored to at least make our cultures believable, right? But it's very clear that there's a certain amount of influence that they have under the the elves.
Exactly. The encounter of the Edain with the elves, cultural encounter of them with the elves, makes them a priori different from any human society of that level of technology or whatever, you know. So yeah,
Galadriel points out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, the comparatively undisturbed. They've had encounters, but they've not been deeply influenced by the elves, either like, you know, sort of like culturally, cultural or like artistic principles or anything like that. Though again, that little hint, Ilana, of in language, right? You know, that they're the fact that there are relics of the elf language, the ancient elf language, right, really does drive home that they're, you know, the roots of the people meeting Avari back in the east, you know, in the far distant days. I really like that. But anyway, okay, so back to Ubang and his meeting with Galadriel. My favorite element of this was his Well, I say it's my favorite. I was a little surprised, but I think I was pleasantly surprised. I was pleasantly surprised at how cool he was with the whole thing, right? On the one hand, what I liked about it was that it made him seem like wise. You know, it was kind of like it was a sort of enlightened response. Like he the way he recognized her, like, I recognized you by your shining eyes. I was like, that's actually okay. Like, that's not everybody would have that reaction, you know. And if he did, I mean, even if he did, to be like, it would have been totally understandable if his reaction had been to reel back in horror and call her a witch or something like that, right? I mean, like, that's, you know, totally, I would not have been shocked if that had been his response, you know. And
he's in his own capital city. I mean, like, surrounded by his people. I just felt like he's in such a place of, this is he rules these people.
Yeah,
like
he can afford to be confident.
Yeah, he was. I wanted to portray him as just really relaxed about the whole, and in control.
And I got the feeling, I don't know, I got the feeling that Galadriel was really uncertain. Like, I felt like he was doing the political calculations faster than she was. Right. Yeah. The whole, like, I'm going to elevate her on her own seat and carry her alongside me. Like, first of all, this is a military triumph and she doesn't even understand what that is. Right. And so, like, there are implications there that he's exploiting clearly. Right. You know, look at my, like, well, is she my ally? Is she my prisoner? You know, who knows, right? Like, what's the difference anyway, right? Like, yeah. And
even in elevating her above the crowd in like a random chair, that still puts her in a not subservient, in a oh my gosh, subordinate.
It's in a context where now she's being introduced to the people in relationship to him.
Yes.
So it's still on his terms and in his
He's the
sphere.
one who has literally raised her. Right.
Right. Yes. So now it's not just her doing her own thing. She's now in his bubble.
Yes.
Yeah. Eventually she kind of tweaks that he's playing politics.
Right.
Yeah. She catches up eventually, but yeah.
But I like that. Like, she, and because that's the, I mean, as I remember, we discussed way back, the big challenge with this entire plot line, right, is how to not make Galadriel look a fool. That's the really, that's a really tough line to walk there. Just ask the Rings of Power people. It's challenging. It's tricky. And it's no, but I mean, it's yeah. It's hard. And I thought my primary thought there was, so far so good. Like, she's not being a sucker. She's not being naive. She's not making foolish assumptions about them. She's certainly not doing the, like, well, these primitives, like, you know, I will, like, you know, she's not looking down on them. She's not taking them for granted. But she's also not understanding them, right? There are things that she's not getting. She's trying to, she's working at it. She's doing her part, and she's doing her part effectively. And she is seeing the big picture, right? I mean, you can see her, especially at the end, getting a little caught up in this shining vision of, like, oh my goodness, like, if I could actually, like, first of all, I mean, because everything is so much better than she thought, right? She had this notion, right? Which is kind of an out of the box, like, you know, this is a risky in the sense of, like, it may turn out to be nothing, right? I mean, she's pursuing what could be a really dubious sort of lead on possible allies, and then she, like, not only finds, oh my goodness, there's like orders of magnitude more of them than we thought there were. And holy cow, they have this huge organized military, right? And oh wow, the entire military is going to come over the mountains and help us fight Morgoth.
Yeah.
Like, this is like beyond like 3 times the best possible, you know, better than she possibly could have expected. And you can see that, at least I felt we could see that at the end of the episode kind of go into her head just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
The sort of wonder of that.
And I think not quite understanding what she's dealing with kind of comes out because we this is a later scene, we could talk about it then, but she takes some risks that Finrod, like she does some things that Finrod did on his first encounter with men that worked spectacularly, and it almost backfires on her.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
That element was really tricky. That was one of the most challenging parts, I think, of the whole episode, and that's where most of my questions are.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, hang on a second. First, before we get there,
you're right.
Ulfang.
Yes.
So Ulfang, which now I feel like I should say Ulfang because I'm saying Ibang, so I should say Ulfang now, because again, now that name is totally different to me. Anyway, but I'm still going to call him Ulfang anyway because I can't help myself. So Ulfang, his reaction, he's resistant. He's more resistant than the king is. I was less than 100% sure why. It isn't that I didn't see any reason for him to be. It's that I saw multiple reasons and I wasn't sure which one it was.
Right.
If his was going to be a like, I'm just like, this is an elf witch out of nowhere and I don't trust elf witches out of nowhere. Like this is strange and new and probably sorceress and best left alone.
We do have a long game to play here with Ulfang's reaction to the elves.
Yeah.
Because eventually his choices are going to lead to his death. So we need to have him making a conscious choice later to actually buy into things.
Okay.
And here the king is making that choice for him.
Right.
So we don't see him actually buy into this because he doesn't.
Right.
He's going along, but he is not the one choosing. And therefore, all we get from him so far is that reticence of, I don't see a reason to do this, to take this course of action. I have not yet been convinced. And rather than giving him that chance to get convinced.
So I wanted him to be skeptical. We did tone down the elf bewitchment. Like, I think he's like originally I had that as an element, but was persuaded to. But I think that's right. That he's just come. He's just had a triumph in his honor because he's subdued the southern borderlands. He's obviously not been home very much in recent years, and now everything's at peace. The kingdom's at peace, and maybe he's thinking about having a bit of a breather for himself. Like, I mean, I didn't put any of that in the script, but like that could be what's going on for him. So like, why should we go across the mountain west for no reason, at this point? But he's not going to disobey his king. So either.
Well, I think to kind of get at his motivations a little bit, to because he's not, despite Ibang's fears, Ulfang is not a politician.
Right.
He does not actually have any interest in trying to usurp the kingdom or anything like that. I think he's almost like one of those guys who like enjoys making money for the game's sake rather than for having the stuff that the money buys.
Right. He's like the military equivalent of that.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I agree.
And so he doesn't see the political gains that Ibang sees, even from the beginning. Like right from the beginning, Ibang sees that there is political capital to be gained in this situation.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost him anything to entertain Galadriel.
Yes.
Right?
Mm.
Whereas Ulfang is like, why are we even bothering with this?
Right.
Because it's not important to him, and he doesn't see it that way.
This was another thing that I really liked about how that whole thing was presented, is that, of course, one possible route to take would be to have the Emperor Ibang just be paranoid, right? Like unjustly suspecting Ulfang just because, not because of anything Ulfang does, but because Ulfang does in fact have the power. Like the power exists, like the potential exists. A coup could be made even if he totally believes that Ulfang isn't going to do it, right? Nevertheless, the fact that it's possible is sufficient. I mean, many an emperor of times past would have considered that sufficient justification despite anything, however loyal the general in question was. I like the element about the inheritance, though, about how he's only got the one son. And so therefore, like,
and Ulfang has many.
And Ulfang has many sons. Yes. So, of course, that was also a delight. I also liked that because it was a delightfully, like, mortal problem, right?
Yeah.
Which Galadriel is going to take a little while to, it's not going to be where her brain goes right away in understanding those dynamics, right? So, again, very understandably, she's going to be a step or two behind in parsing the political elements of this whole situation, because it's not a big problem. I mean, Fingolfin may have introduced the idea of like appointing and preparing an heir, but still, like, it's not.
And this is a dynasty that's been going for 3, maybe 4 generations.
Right. Right.
So it's not like it's 20 years, 20 generations of dynasty.
Right. So it's still relatively new. So it's not like exactly. Anyway, so I like that. Like it was even explicitly said at one point that there is not a problem with Ulfang now, but like the time might come. Right. The time might come, especially if something were to happen to Prince Ibang, that the people would begin, clamoring for Ulfang, and then whether he wants it or not, he's a problem, right? So anyways, I really like, again, it was a lovely way to show the Emperor being shrewd and being ruthless, but not horrible, right? Not like red flag all over the place. I'm, Baron Harkonnen over here, right? Like,
he has every reason in the world to have concerns.
Sure. It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. And he's not doing anything bad to Ulfang. In fact, he's doing something great for Ulfang, right? Like, this is a win-win all over the place.
And Ulfang's sons, who he's going
and
to make
Ulfang's sons, whom he's getting rid of conveniently. Yes. Let us set them up very nicely far away from here. Yes.
And I mean, obviously, one of the issues with people who are in power and ruling a country is that if they like really want that power and to hold on to it, they probably are quite corrupt.
Right.
Like if that's what you're going for, you probably already have a problem. But he's 4th generation. He didn't decide to be emperor of this country. So that's the one thing that Tolkien does with the like, I have all these monarchies. And he's like, but it's just, that was the guy who was supposed to do the job. He was born to it. He just had to, go do the best job he could. So he tries to get his like uncorrupt kings by being like, well, they didn't really have a choice. And so,
I also wanted to give a flavor of this dynasty. They're not warrior kings. I mean, that's not, so
the Emperor is not a warrior king.
It's the captain of the armies is it's important, but like their influence is administrative and prosperity and for the people and all of that sort of stuff. So which is kind of like why we don't leave the city and go and chase off over the mountain, the military lead.
So this is what led to one of the big questions that I have, and I'm kind of skipping, and I'm going to circle back to the elf sorcery question, and the necromancer along with it, right?
Naturally.
So, but Ulfang, I'm still focused on Ulfang here. I felt that the brilliant political stroke that was sending Ulfang and his army and his sons across the mountains to conquer these new lands with these new allies whom whatever, like, they can work that out when they're over there. But that was a genius political move on the part of the Emperor. And I felt like it was underplayed in particular Ulfang's reaction to it. Because no, Ulfang doesn't, I mean, as general of the armies, Ulfang does not see a military necessity for this. But surely he'd be a great fool not to see that there's a potential enormous military opportunity here. The reason he's not like, oh man, of course, all day long we should go off into the West and conquer a new part of the continent, is because they don't know what's over there. They've never been over there, right? And so, yeah, for him to just come up with that on his own, to be like, hey, Emperor, I got a great idea. Let's cross the mountains and conquer whatever the heck is over there, right? The unknown is the reason why nobody suggested that and why it's not an intuitive thing to do. Mm-hmm. But armed with some intelligence of what's going on over there and a high-ranking representative of other peoples over there who is saying, yeah, there's land to be had, and yeah, there's an enemy to be fought. But if you come over and fight with us, then you can have all these lands. Like, now that becomes not a sure thing, but now that's, if you're an expansionist empire, like, I mean, seriously, I feel like if someone had come and, said that to, like, Claudius, he would have been like, we attack tomorrow. Like, no, like, who says no? Right? Like, surely a Roman emperor would have thought that way. Even if they didn't do it initially, because it would have been foolish for them to just, go off into the blue. But the second thing, not only that, so there's that element that it actually, like, it does make military sense, in the context of having intelligence and allies in hand that they didn't have before. But the second thing is the inducement, the way in which, because the thing that makes it a really genius political move, is that he's also, it's the perfect solution to the Ulfang problem, right? You can't ignore the Ulfang problem because it's a legitimate problem. Right. And it's not Ulfang's fault, but it's a legitimate problem. You can't ignore it. The bad solution is just to have him killed. Right. Just do away with him. But that's a bad solution because that could lead to rebellion on its own. And you could lose control of the armies. The army could rebel if the army loves its general. So this is a big problem, right? So that's not a good solution to the problem. But saying, I'm going to set you up as like a vassal suzerain of these vast lands, which are also comfortably far away and separated from us by a mountain range. Like, okay, like, again, who loses? Everybody wins, right? He not only takes care of his inconvenient general and vassal, who's a potential threat to him, but does so in a way that will make him and his people really happy. And, oh, by the way, also vastly extend his own empire. I mean, it's like everybody wins in that solution. It's a genius solution. And why isn't Ulfang excited about it?
So the thing is, we do get one conversation between Ulfang and Galadriel. And she's like, oh, here's my idea. This is all great. And Ulfang asks her a question that she doesn't have an answer to, because it's basically a kinslaying adjacent.
Oh yeah, that's right. Have you slaughtered any innocents? Yeah,
right.
It's like, what? And personally, or as a people? And do you mean recently, or
right? It's and her pause.
Yeah,
and he says exactly and walks away. So what we're portraying from Ulfang is he's not buying Galadriel's intelligence.
Right.
If what she says is true, and over the mountains there's allies and lands to be had, and you can fight an enemy, but whatever, who cares about that guy?
He's a soldier. That's what he does.
Yeah, that's a soldier. They do that. Like, what's being sold as, a bundle of goods, yeah, very attractive. Ulfang's not buying because he doesn't trust what's in that bundle.
Right.
He doesn't trust that Galadriel's telling the truth about what's on the other side of the mountains, and he knows he's walking into something more complicated than the way she's portrayed it.
Right, for sure. And here's the thing, like, Morgoth is the bad guy in capital letters, right? Mm-hmm. But from Ulfang's point of view, nobody is that. Like, that's not a real thing,
right?
In his experience, like, he lives in this
longer game played. Yes. Like Ulfang's arc over the season is his coming to understand that.
Right.
So we want to start being skeptical about that.
The people of Sooth have never encountered a Dark Lord before.
Right. Yes. Right. They live a very shades of gray kind of existence. And, they're not engaged in the war of the cosmos. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. They're engaging with rebel leaders who maybe aren't great guys either. Right. But, maybe it's not great that we have to have rebel leaders, maybe that says something about us.
Maybe it's not great that we have to suppress them, but rebels have to be suppressed.
But they're also bad guys themselves. Like, nobody engaging in warfare has clean hands.
That's Ulfang's take here.
That's his starting point.
Right. Yeah. Like, you have someone who's causing you problems. I believe that.
Right.
But under no circumstances do I believe he's a really bad guy and must be stopped at all costs for the fate of the world.
All evil.
Of all evil in the world.
Right. He's like, but really though, what did this guy do to you? It sounds like he did something, but until you tell me what, I really don't see what all this rhetoric is for.
Yeah.
It must be blowing this story out of proportion. And therefore, if that part's not true, why should I believe the lands are available? Why should I believe you actually have great allies over there?
Right.
Like, you're selling something here, and I think
we're about to engage in this incredibly expensive
and risky
endeavor,
and risky, because they are going, in fact, as far as they know, off into the blue.
Right.
Yes, and so that's Ulfang is not willing to assume that risk, and the reason the Emperor is because for him it's win.
Yes.
Even if there is risk, who cares?
He would just as soon not have to feed these guys so that they can later, dethrone him.
Yeah, it's true. Like, and the army, Ulfang's. So go.
Sorry.
No,
I was just going to say, Ebung also has the Necromancer's word for it as well as Galadriel.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Right.
So that's,
he feels he has his own intelligence independently verified.
Yes.
Ulfang doesn't have that yet. And Ulfang is holding out for real intelligence on what's going on. And he feels like he's still in the dark.
No, that makes sense. No, I was just going to say, like, one of the win options is Ulfang takes his fanatically loyal to their beloved general army off into the west, and they all die.
And are never seen again.
Could be worse. Like, that's not the worst possible outcome. It's not awesome. It's not as good as the other ones.
He can raise another army.
Right. He can raise another army. No big deal. Right. And one more loyal to himself rather than just to Ulfang, whose loyalty to him hinges entirely upon Ulfang's loyalty, because Ulfang is the one to whom they're primarily loyal. So no, I totally agree. And Ulfang obviously is not going to be thinking like that. So so I can see that. I can see why he would be resistant. There was, and of course, a lot of this is I know it's hard enough to squeeze to accomplish the things that you're trying to accomplish in the amount of space that you have. Right. So whenever one is responding to a script, it's always really easy to be like, oh, like, there should have been more about this. And it's like, right. So what are you cutting then in order to put in, I mean, so I just want to acknowledge that I know that, but
if something's not coming through clearly enough, maybe we need another example to really drive it home.
substance of Ulfang's own, like his distrust for Galadriel was clear, like that he was not just accepting her. You know, the thing that came across most clearly, I think, was, you know, she expected to come and tell their story, and then everyone was gonna come and want to fight with them, and Ulfang is like, pull the other one, right? Like, you know, I'm not deploying my army because, you know, just because one of the most beautiful women in the continent comes and makes a nice speech, right? Like that's
right.
No.
Yeah.
I can see. I felt that it felt almost tossed off, like Ibang almost just tossed off the, like, oh, and by the way, you'll be like the ruler of that land. Like that was.
Well, he says his sons will be. I was thinking that Ulfang actually has zero interest in political leadership, zero interest in being the regent over the other side of the mountains. I think Ulfang would see himself as doing a job and coming back again. His sons, like giving his sons regencies, that's a nice thing. And given what he thinks of his own children, that's probably, like, he could see that.
Right.
But as far as Ulfang himself is concerned, I didn't think he actually had any interest in it for himself, that he's actually not that ambitious.
Right.
That.
No, and I can believe that. I can believe that.
But I can, there's certainly tweaks that can be done in that scene to what would you like to see the balance changed in?
I think presenting the lordship of that new dominion, I felt like it needed a little more fanfare from Ibang, right?
Yeah.
That, like, I mean, even just, he could even have framed the whole thing that way, rather than saying, by the way,
you bombard regent,
or like even before he talks about the army, right? Like, instead of being like, so I'm sending you guys over there.
But this is an additional, like, he gave him the brooch and the.
Exactly. Now, like, I've been thinking, and like, I have not yet been able to pay you back for everything that you own, you deserve. So I'm going to give to you and your family all of that land west of the mountains. All you've got to do is go and conquer it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's step
one.
And
I kept having in my head the line that when Tolkien says that the Easterlings had coveted the lands of South Beleriand and weren't given them at the end. And I thought, you know what, they are pretty unpeopled. I mean,
there's nobody there anymore.
There's plenty of space for them to settle there, like the Edain.
And it was beautifully fertilized by pigs for hundreds of years.
Yeah. So I liked the idea that the might have been that they help the elves defeat Morgoth, and they end up in South Beleriand,
where they wanted to be, and having it be lands that the Edain had lived in and then vacated, both with the people of Haleth in Caranthir's territory, and then the Estelad folk. Then we know that those lands are good for human habitation. Like, both those groups moved on for reasons, but
not because the land was bad.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay, that's an easy fix for that.
So and then that way, because as I said, the emphasis was on the military action first, and then like, and P.S., like, you'll get to be king and whatever. Like, it's kind of what it felt like. Whereas again, I think for the political move, because then again, instead of anybody even suspecting, nobody could even whisper, like the emperor is envious of Ulfang, because no, like, he's generous to Ulfang. I mean, he's look at it, what a great emperor he is. Holy cow. Look at how everybody gets just what they deserve, in this empire. It's phenomenal, right?
Right.
So that a little bit more, and then Ulfang would be uncomfortable with that. A follow-up question. This is not a, like, I had a problem with this, or I was uncertain about this question. Just a kind of I'm trying to understand it, because it's going to become more relevant as we move forward with Ulfang's character. Why is Ulfang not at all interested in political stuff? Like, is it because he's like a humble dude, like the, like the protagonist of Gladiator, who just wants to be back on his farm? Or is it because he, like, why? What?
He really likes being, if we think of the society as the emperor and his dynasty being the administrative rulers, and then the military is kind of a separate arm that is under, he quite likes being like not the big cheese, like, and having to make the decisions. I think he likes being a soldier.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, he kind of like, he doesn't want to sit around and go over treaties and like decide about where the grain is going to get stored.
So
like,
his response to it would not be like, I seek no such power. His response would be something like, I'm a soldier. That's what I like doing. That's what I want to do. Okay.
Right. He quite literally is at the very pinnacle of everything he ever dreamed of right now, which is another reason why he's not particularly overly interested in pursuing this.
But there's always a certain level of humility involved in anyone who reaches a really high point in their career and doesn't seek to go beyond it. Right.
I mean, he's a good guy.
That's the thing. We are portraying Ulfang as a good person.
Right.
He has his flaws.
Terrible father.
And one of those flaws is that he is not a good dad, because many people who are very successful in their career, consciously or unconsciously, set expectations for their children, and then the children come along and are not that level of success in the career. And the dad is like, I don't understand why my sons hate me.
Yeah.
And that's Ulfang.
So that's his flaw. But but as a human being, and I do think there's a humility to his approach, but also he loves being a soldier. I mean,
he's very comfortable living the lifestyle he has with the people he has surrounded himself with. He likes it. He's good with it.
Yeah.
But
I would say that
popular. I mean, he likes the accolades and all of that sort of stuff.
But also to say, like, he kind of like has no more worlds to conquer in this little space that he exists. Once he becomes exposed to the conflict in Beleriand, like, that shifts the dials enormously, because it's like, oh, I have this whole other enormous war that I can be involved in winning. That's awesome. And then he meets this guy Maedhros, who he finds kind of to almost be a kindred spirit in a lot of ways.
I was going to say, it really sounds like he and Maedhros would get along like a house on fire. They're going to
get on really
well. Yeah.
They're not going to get a lot of screen time together, but
right.
But I think that they do.
They do see kindred spirit in each other.
Yeah.
I think we talked about that already.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, first of all, I love one of the things that I love most about what we're doing with this whole plot line is that we're introducing this delightful, like, what if into the situation, right?
Yeah.
Like, this prospect, not just a prospect that it could have worked out, but like it should have worked out, right? Like
it feels right.
Instead of it just being a fake all along, right?
Yeah. Right.
We want
the audience to feel the loss here.
Yeah.
And if they don't know what could have been,
yeah,
then there's no loss. And that's why we're investing in making this a real option, something that looks like it could turn out. I mean, there's lots of humans. All the humans we've met so far have more or less aligned with the elves. Not entirely. I mean, obviously, Hallis people aren't super pro-elf. And the people who left the Estelad meeting and went back over the mountains weren't super pro anything in Beleriand.
Right.
So, like, there's been some dissent there. But overall, the humans, given the chance to get to know the elves, they're like, yeah, we're with you guys.
Right.
So we're showing the chance that this group of humans once they meet them and once they see what's going on, we'll be like, yeah, you guys about
Right.
the elves.
Right. No, it's really cool. It makes me want to editorialize for a minute because, of course, I could imagine. So imagine that we've actually produced this show and this episode airs, right? Or this season airs. And then we get lots of people saying like, you guys changed what Tolkien did. Like Tolkien the text clearly says that they were just like traitors from the beginning and just hiding it. And now you think you guys can make a better story than Tolkien, right? You've changed it, into something Tolkien didn't do. And what I would say in response to that, like one of the things that going through this really helps to show, I think, is how this changes based on the kind of story we're telling compared to and how much of an apples to oranges comparison it is in so many cases between the kind of story that Tolkien is writing at many points in the Silmarillion, right? When he's in plot summary mode. Right. I mean, think about the total amount of text.
And it's also this is the elves' perspective. Of course, they're going to say, well, guys were just
exactly. So that's So between that and the brevity of it, of course, we're not going to get a nuanced depiction of like how they reacted and what might have been and whatever.
Yeah, and if you think about how he portrays the Dunlendings in Lord of the Rings, they're very periphery to the story. Like they're referenced a few times, but we know very little about them, except after Helm's Deep, when some of them are really surprised not to be like brutally slaughtered by the Rohirrim, because that's what Saruman told them the Rohirrim were going to do, because the Rohirrim were terrible, and we realize that they got drawn into this war with some false narratives,
right?
And have some legitimate grievances, and I feel like Tolkien while he does not at any point overtly just come out and say that, it is very clear that he is aware of the fact that the Dunlendings have perfectly legitimate reasons to be upset with Rohirrim.
Yes. Yeah.
And so he introduces that nuance in the backstory there, just with a few little details.
Yes.
Enough to let you know, like, oh, there's more going on here. And I feel like this story didn't have those nuances in the original text.
Right.
But the original text doesn't tell us that there wasn't any nuance.
Right.
It doesn't say they were traitors from the beginning, really.
In fact, we get a little tiny bit of a glimpse in that there are some that don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Why do you have Bor and his sons?
Yes.
Right.
If they were terrible from the beginning.
Yeah.
So clearly,
why does Ulfang need to get murdered?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he just, dies.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. But
we're murdering him for reasons.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I forget.
But it's not,
I forget we did
exactly.
that.
I mean, this stuff is all exactly illustrating that. Like the point that I was making is that the narrative that Tolkien was telling is both extremely limited in its scope, right? It's this tiny little part of a plot summary description of what's going on there. There's almost no room for like nuance, and he's certainly making not even the faintest gesture of inviting us into the point of view of the Easterlings and what they thought they were doing and how they understood any of this stuff going on. Because not only is there not time, but also, Ilana, as you say, because we don't care, because it's the elf perspective, right? Like we're not interested. Like the readers of this chronicle are not interested in what those humans were thinking. What matters is that they betrayed them in the end. So anyway, but in taking that narrative and expanding it as we are, the kind of fill in the blanks adaptation that SilmFilm is necessitates the formation of these kinds of narrative, because that sort of a really simple snapshot, which you can do, just like, and the Easterlings came over and they betrayed him. That's the story, right?
Yep.
That's true. That is the story that matters from a elf-centered chronicle standpoint, right?
Right.
But
it's not the only story.
No,
there.
It's
like orcs clearly have babies. I mean,
clearly have babies. Orcs sexually reproduce is very, very obvious in every way. That was so funny. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but like it was so funny to watch people groping, like trying to cope with the fact that orcs reproduce sexually, and I'm like, was this a surprise to you? Really? Yeah. Anyway,
sorry,
There
I
was
apologize.
a reason Peter Jackson's movies had the Uruk-hai come out of the pods, right? Like
because it was icky to think about the actual sexual reproduction of the Uruk-hai. Yes.
Well,
yes.
that's certainly more icky than just orcs having babies.
Well,
for
yeah,
sure.
I mean that story. Yeah, it was clear that he wasn't going to go with the actual story, but I mean, if that's what you've seen before, you're like, good, I don't need to think about that.
Right. Though even then, like at the same time, I
know.
that scene
And,
always
I mean,
bothered me because of its
I guess-
internal inconsistency, right? Like
Right.
Saruman is
For the
going to talk
exact
about
reason.
how orcs come from elves while
Yeah.
showing us
Yeah.
that they come from slime pits in the ground. Like, which is it? Like,
Yeah.
they came from elves through slime pits in the ground? It doesn't even make any sense, right? But
Yeah.
Very
and-
questionable
while-
fantasy biology going on there.
Yeah.
yes.
While taking over the minds of kings is an old device of Saruman's, and that's why I've trusted him as the leader of my order for centuries and millennia. Sorry, I just saw that bit again recently.
Yeah. No.
I mean, we could have had the Easterlings come over the mountains ab initio, and then the elves having to work out what to do with this. But like, there's still a question of why now and all that. So
It's also like it's not interesting. It's
No,
not
it's
that
not.
interesting a
Yeah.
story. Like because it's just a thing that now happens, and
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
not
if
we're
you
not
can't-
being asked to investigate
not
why.
advocate.
Yeah, if you cannot understand a character's motivation, then they just did something randomly.
Yes.
And that's not usually how storytelling works. Like if it's a story, there has to be a reason for things to happen. Even if that character is not having a lot of agency and not actually making the choices, why did they do what they do? Like if you
Yes.
don't know the answer after watching the show, then
And
But,
if you're
you know,
making
there's the story.
Silmarillion the documentary, it's fine. We're
Right.
not
they
asking.
came over the mountains, they betrayed
And
them.
we're shifting like this as the Silmarillion, as we move through the first stage, the human stories become more prominent.
Yes.
And we're exploring things about humanity and humanness and so on. I mean,
Yep.
Tolkien was too, so like
Yeah.
along there as well.
I agree. By the way, I have a totally separate sort of trivia question that I wanted to ask you guys. Trivia about the plot. Did you guys decide where the rebels in the south were? Like, where was the
No,
battle?
we didn't.
You didn't?
No.
Okay. I just want to
I think we mentioned a river, didn't we? Mention that
you did mention the Grey Flood. That he
Yeah.
says
He
that that's where.
points towards the Great Flood. I mean, I was just trying to imagine what one might be able to see from that
Right.
vantage point.
Right.
So
Yeah. No, but I would say I was in my head I was like, were the rebels all the way down in Enidwaith or were they north of the Grey Flood? Like that's anyway.
They're relatives of the Haladin. Then
Yeah.
I think that the fact that they were southern fiefs was something we hadn't specified in the script.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you had that in your heads. Like I said, it's trivia because it doesn't impact the story.
Yeah.
But,
that's never stopped us from working something like that.
I was
out.
having so much fun in that scene, a lot of that you were just mentioning, imagining Eriador and reworking the geopolitical
like pre-Arnor
map of
Eriador.
Yes.
It's
yeah.
I've had to resist the temptation significantly.
Yeah.
I haven't made any maps.
Right.
Like none of that has happened.
I was sitting there with the map of Eriador, but I was just trying to imagine it without the. Yeah.
Okay. Just wondering if you guys had gone there or not. Okay. So let's come back to the ensorcelment because that's the trickiest part of the episode.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
On the one hand, I really liked the idea. So I'm putting myself as I was asked to do, right, in Galadriel's position, right? She knows the task that she has to do. She knows what she needs to tell their story. She needs to talk them into it. that she would have her brother's performance to Beor and his people as a model in her head is lovely. Like, that's great. Like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this just like Big Brother did, except on a much bigger scale. Right? Like, great. Cool. Love that. That an elf singing their song would, no matter what she did, no matter what her motivations were, or what she was trying to do, that, you know, like Farian drama unfolding in front of them was going to be something that their people would call magic, perhaps. Clear, like inescapable, I think, right? You can't have one of the Noldor making poetic and musical art in front of them and not have them have a very different experience than they've ever had when listening to a singer before. Especially and delightful contrast with like the greatest human troubadour, you know, the bard who is there, right? That was lovely.
It was their very best they've ever had. I made this connection when we talked about Finrod encountering the Beorians, of the way that people talk about the way musicians, concurrent musicians, talk about watching Jimi Hendrix perform for the first time and hearing these sounds come out of the guitar that they never imagined could ever happen.
Right.
And that's kind of how, like, I can see, like, if the troubadour like handed Galadriel his lute, being handed it back to him and kind of giving it that look that I
tried to work something like that into that scene, and then there was too much going.
It's hard, but like I'm reminded of the scene at the end of Back to the Future, when Marty McFly goes into that very 80s style guitar riff, and he hands the guitar back to Chuck Berry's brother, who looks at it like, what did you do to this thing that I've held in my hand so many times before?
Right.
And that's kind of the reaction that I would expect. Their greatest bard to have.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. So,
I took it out because I just couldn't fit it in any.
So far we're on board with, wow, Farian drama looks like magic to these people.
I'm waiting for the but.
Yeah, well, I think I know where it is, but I'm real curious.
It's not, well, so, okay. I just questions.
Yep.
What is Galadriel's plan? Like, what is she trying? Her goal, instead I'll tell you what I thought her goal was based on how you described it. So what I got from it was that she was going to lay on the Farian drama with the motivation of helping them to see and understand. She's like, I'm gonna make you a part of our story. I'm gonna make you like live our story, so that when you emerge from this, you're gonna, I mean, in other words, she's gonna attempt to do precisely what any rhetorician or artist would be attempting to do in the same situation. She just has more tools at her disposal, right? I'm gonna do it with Farian drama, not just, I'm
gonna show you the movie.
Right, exactly. Exactly. I'm gonna.
And she knows they have no concept of Morgoth.
Right.
And what's at stake and all of that sort of stuff. So she's worked that out.
She's doing the Capra Why We Fight films, essentially, from the 40s, the late 30s and 40s.
This is what's at stake.
Right.
Right. So which I don't know if you've seen any of those. They're effective.
I haven't seen those.
Oh my gosh. Like he's so good at, and I mean, it's propaganda. Like it's clear propaganda, but it's also the truth. Like that at the time,
as is what Galadriel's doing.
Right. They didn't have to lay it on super thick to show you these are bad guys. Like these are the bad guys, capital B, capital G.
Right.
Right.
Yep. And that no.
This is not a you furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war situation.
Right.
This is Galadriel attempting to win over allies to her cause. So she is presenting the information in the most persuasive way she can to transform her listeners into true believers in her cause.
Right.
Yeah.
That's her goal and what she's setting out to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if anybody knew the truth, clearly they would side with her.
Yeah.
In her mind. It doesn't even occur to her.
Yeah, that's the conversation with Galadriel that she has before this scene. Is that she's like, I just need to tell my story.
Yeah.
And then they're going to understand, right?
Yeah. Once they know, once they understand.
But they're at risk too. I mean, like, you know, Morgoth's going to climb the mountains one day, you know.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Yeah. No, her pitch, right, is not only actually true, but it really is in their best interest to ally themselves with the elves. Like it's like she told, like, it's propaganda, but she absolutely has right on her side, right? Like, yeah. It's totally fine.
Yeah, but the butt still.
Okay. Well, it's not exactly a but it's with the response afterwards and the interpretation of the response afterwards. It's the ensorcelment thing, right? That I could easily see. At first I thought that what was happening was that, in fact, her propaganda message was in fact so effective due to the artistic and semi-magical resources at her command, right, in delivering them, that many of her audience would be swayed so completely that some would be suspicious, like that people would make the accusation that she had cast a spell on them. I mean,
which in a way isn't entirely inaccurate.
She does. Yeah. No, she absolutely does. But that's where I was hazy, right? Because well,
the ensorcelment side of it doesn't really get explicitly talked about until we have the private conversation between the king and the prince. And what I was going to say is what I'm wondering, just having a look at this again. I mean, the issue is not the general ensorcelment. The issue is the prince's ensorcelment, because that's a risk. And it occurred to me that we haven't really set up why that's a risk before this scene, and that maybe we need a bit more cueing in to why the prince and the king don't leave the city, or this is the prince to say, I must go and help these people, does sound like he's lost leave of his senses. So maybe we need to set that up.
Well,
okay. So you're saying the risk to the empire itself and the dynasty.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a few levels of what we need to sort out. One is, what is the actual effect on the prince? Is he simply so impressed by Galadriel's story that he's like, surely you all understand we must help these people? Like, is he just a bleeding heart who is inflamed by this idea, and he's like an energetic young guy with big ideas now who has a dream? Right. Or did Galadriel actually put a spell on him?
When I was reading it,
right.
Yeah. When I was reading it, I was assuming that first scenario was the actual one, right? And that it was being misinterpreted as an ensorcelment by his alarmed parents, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But then, as times went on, I was like, "But is he actually
acting?
I was not
acting
certain.
Like he's So here's kind of where I'm the category I'm putting this in. I'm putting this in the category of Thingol standing in the glade with Melian for centuries without moving, right? Melian's not intentionally doing any harm to him, right?
Sure.
But he is so the impact of this encounter with Fairy is so profound on him that it overwrites a bunch of his mental thought processes. Like, she's kind of overdone it, almost like she doesn't know, right? And these people have had no contact with the elves in this way.
That's a really interesting parallel, right? I mean, if Mablung had said, like, hey, this, like, you know, goddess just laid the whammy on Thingol, you know, and cast a spell on him and has enslaved his will, it's not wrong. Actually, like, that's kind of exactly what happened, right?
Well, right.
I mean, like, benevolently, and it was fine. Right?
And of course, Tolkien is using that as an image of, like, the effect of seeing a beautiful woman has on a young man, right?
Yes,
like that. There's that too.
Right.
I sort of feel like if we'd set up if there'd been space to set up the prince a bit more, then it would be a bit clearer. Because I think he's already. I would think that he's already kind of inclined to be impressionable like this.
Yes, yes. So I think that the answer to the question you were asking is yes, right? He is a young, impressionable young man. He is an impressionable young man who has no opportunity to distinguish himself personally, right?
I mean, look at his name. I mean, his name is the same as his father's. He doesn't have.
He's gonna take over for dad eventually.
Yep.
Yeah.
But he's not going to get to do anything interesting or exciting. And now here it is.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Out of the blue. But also
and really meaningful. Like, this is seriously meaningful.
Right. It's the thing in Paralandra where Ransom realizes that he is actually fighting the devil.
Right.
And it's totally fine for him to, like, pull all the stops and feel perfectly fine about beating this thing into oblivion, which he never could have felt okay doing.
And just in case Prince Ibang ever has had any concerns about, like, is it really okay for us to oppress the populace and build our own power, right, and expand our empire? This, if he did, we don't know if he had any doubts about that, but if he did have any doubts about that, he wouldn't have any doubts about this. So no, I can see all that from his perspective. Again, let me step
but the
aside
part where he's sitting there with that dazed look on his face, and his parents are like, we've got to go fix our son, he's been put under a spell. That's the thing of Galadriel. If that's really the effect, Galadriel has gone way too far with what she did.
But that happens all the time, though. Like, it happens to Baron. I
understand, but, like, that is the part where it's like, this is not Baron and Luthien encountering one another, Thingol and Melian encountering one another. We know what happens in those stories. They're in love and they become, in some sense, equals. Well, spouses anyway.
So we're never going to see, once the Easterlings go west, we're never going to see Ibang.
Prince Ibang again.
So Prince Ibang and Galadriel, their encounter is very clearly her using him to get an army. And that's the difference, where we do have to pay attention to how far she goes in the ensorcelment direction. It's fine for his parents to think he's ensorcelled, but how ensorcelled is he really?
So we can. Well, that's fine.
So I have an adjacent question to this, which was another thing that I think led to some of my uncertainties about this. And my question is, why is even the people like Ibang the Emperor and the Queen, who are not ensorcelled, right, who are not convinced completely, or Ulfang, right? Why are they not freaking the heck out? Because clearly the experience they've just had is deeply weird, right? I mean, like, at the very least, being subjected to Farian drama for the first time is going to be what, like, you know, taking someone who's never seen a moving picture into an IMAX theater, right? And at the very least, they're going to leave there saying, what the heck just happened to me, right? Even, like, whether they liked it or didn't like it, right? They're going to, whether they were moved or not moved by the message.
That's a good point. And that can be, we don't get their perspective on what happened.
Right.
but I think maybe we should. Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, so one of the things that I like about, because when Finrod does his thing, like
yes.
pretty much everybody buys into it.
Yes.
Right. There's some resistance in it because there had to be, otherwise there's no story happening in that episode.
Right.
But they're like, those people are perfectly willing to accept that this is a thing that this guy is able to do. Right.
But
whereas
there's kind of a, like, he's got to convince them he's not a god dynamic at the beginning.
For sure.
Because
whereas
of that effect.
Here, these people would get a sense that she's kind of trying to play on superstition here, and they think that there's a trick there's got to be some kind of trick involved. They're too civilized to just be taken in.
Well, but it's not about, like, so yeah, but the trick,
they see themselves that way.
So I think they can be caught up in it just the same.
I'm talking about like the older, wiser folks who aren't completely.
Yeah, but once it's over, they kind of go, okay, so what did we learn? That wow, great art,
right? Amazing experience. Like that experience was something like a spell was just cast on me, right? But they are like, however, like the content of the message, I'm still a little plus my, I'm gonna hedge my bets or whatever.
But like we can talk about, like you do, after the great concert, you go and have coffee and talk about it and so on, and you're not in it anymore, right? So it's that sort of, that maybe that's where the king and queen are at that point, whereas their son is still caught up in it and can't let go of it. And I think that's a real experience
for sure.
Great artistic experience.
Yeah. But see, this is where I think it would clarify what's going on with the son, is that if it's clear that they did share the artistic experience, right? The only difference is, so they would get it, like they would understand why their son is blown away because they experienced the same thing. The only difference is they didn't buy the message.
They're a little more. Yeah.
Well, they've talked about, they've gone off for coffee afterwards and talked about
but again, but there's a way in which that parallel doesn't work. And that is, it was not just great art. They would not even recognize this as great art. This was magic. Like, she just cast a spell. She just did something funky to all of them. I mean, I would think the other, by the way, that the one place I can think of, certainly in the Lord of the Rings, where we get that firsthand experience of a mortal encountering elvish art, is Frodo's listening to the music in the Hall of Fire. Right. Which is like an out of body experience where he's like gone for who knows how long. I mean, like, they're going to, like, when they come back, they've got to be wondering, like, is it the same day? Like, how much time has passed? Like, did somebody pick my pocket while I wasn't paying attention? What's happening? Right.
So in the scene with the king and queen, they can acknowledge their own experience.
Yeah.
And then
another way,
the fun is not snapped out of it yet.
Yeah. Another way that you can do this is, like, before people start shouting in the scene where it happens, to have the Emperor Ulfang kind of like almost wrenching himself free of it, to be like, okay, so the stories that that we've heard about, some of the stories are true. Yeah. Right. And but like, to have it, to show the actual effort that it takes him to kind of like
shake it off.
To return to reality.
Yes.
But talk directly to Galadriel, like publicly, like in that sense, so talking for the people, as he expects it, wow, that was
right. And that would also,
I can see why we have the kind of stories about elves that we have.
Yes.
And he, in doing so, he's deliberately trying to use his own will and his own words to kind of mitigate the effects in a way. Like that was really interesting. We all know that a real thing did not just happen here. you know, to kind of like return a little bit of reality, but I would like to see him have to really dig deep to like wrench himself free of that as quickly as he does. And I'm okay with him doing that. He's a really savvy, strong-willed guy.
And that might be enough then to contrast the experience of the sort of, you know, more savvy adults in the room from the young, impressionable prince who's totally absorbed in it.
Totally absorbed,
I mean, we, you know, to a point where they need to consult the necromancer about it.
Well, I mean, it's even... one can even articulate this in directly Tolkienian terms, right? It's about that investment of secondary and primary belief, right? And that's the wrench that Ibang successfully does, right? He's able to reorient himself and be like, secondary world, secondary world, that's not the real world, that's the secondary world. And Ulfang would even be resistant and be like, no, that's her secondary world, right? Like, that's her story. Right. And she just shoved me into that story, and like that was weird and B
did not like
impressive. But like, I'm not okay with that. Like, you know, again, pull the other one. But the son, the prince, right? Is still investing primary belief. Like he can barely even tell the difference. And that something has almost broken in him. Is and like that this is something that Galadriel didn't intend, that it goes further than Galadriel intended, I think is fair.
There's that it's not entirely like substance abuse, but there's certain substances that you can take that have this sort of impact. And I think that describing fairy and drama in those like that's the closest we're going to get. Like, right? The closest that we're going to get is somebody taking mushrooms,
that kind of out of body experience where you're seeing and perceiving things that I see what you mean. So yes, okay, so that's
that'll help.
And if something, maybe even something in Galadriel. The problem is she doesn't have her interlocutor with her. Like we don't get a debrief on the performance from Galadriel's side, right? It would be interesting to hear her.
But she could look. I mean, she could. There could be something in her expression, her looking at the prince, or something that suggests that she, like this was
realizes that something went wrong.
I mean, like I think she's quite fine for when she stopped. People should come out to the primary world again and having been informed through this immersive experience, the danger that
and she's not that familiar with humans and human psychology. She's not going to get it.
If we needed to actually have dialogue that kind of gets at that, the conversation between her and Ulfang, like Ulfang could, if he had this like deeply unsettling experience in this way that we're kind of describing, if he were to address that with her, and she kind of like responds like, to be fair, I'm not used to dealing with you guys, that there were some reactions to that I did not expect.
We could put that in. That's easy,
you know. And I feel like that would go a long way in helping him. Like that would be very honest of her to him.
Yes. He would respect that, I think. Yes. Because I mean, he's got I mean, one of the questions, at the very least, it would be a totally natural thing if some people were to run screaming from the room as soon as she began. Like that would not be an unreasonable response and more after it stops, to be convinced that she is a malevolent witch who is manifestly who has just cast a spell on all of them.
I think that reaction is ameliorated by the fact that they are already primed for artistic expression. Like like if she just out of the blue started singing, maybe
like to people in the street.
Right. Yeah. But that they were just listening to their, like they were already elevated.
And that the prince, like there's already rumors about fairy and drama out there. Right.
Yeah.
So they're even like, okay, so like it's like, yeah, let's try the drug, you know.
Right. Yeah. So no, it's I agree. I'm not saying that I think people should run screaming from the room,
but
I'm just saying
they could be forgiven for doing so.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like it would not be illogical.
Yes.
When you have no context for an experience,
yes,
and you have no idea what to expect or what it is, then yes, it's going to be scary because you don't understand what's happening, and you can't figure out the limits of anything,
right?
Because you've never seen this before.
What's real anymore?
Right. And this is just to say that the first roller coaster I went on, I was 8 years old, and it was Space Mountain, and no one had told me what a roller coaster was before. So I did not understand the physics of roller coasters as an 8-year-old, and didn't understand like how we weren't going to get thrown out of the vehicle and all die. This definitely seemed like something that was very dangerous. And there were mirrors, and it was in the dark, so I was just very, very confused. Whereas as an adult, this past month I went to amusement park that had an indoor roller coaster, and it's fine. There's nothing scary about it when you know what roller coasters are, and you understand that there's going to be sudden turns and changes of direction, although that one does drop you.
So
if you don't know about that can also scare people.
So Disney is getting ready to dismantle their dinosaur ride, but the first time I took Nessa on it, they tell you that they're transporting you back in time on a time vehicle to go back to the time when there were dinosaurs, and you begin to travel on this vehicle through this very, to a child, convincing diorama. Like there are dinosaurs that move past you, and they're very lifelike. And then a Carnotaurus starts charging your vehicle, and Nessa, she was 4 or 5 at the time. She immediately lost it because this thing came within like 4 feet of her, approaching her side of the vehicle, and like we had to kind of sit down. And I was very reticent to kind of like break the spell in most cases, but here I had to be like, Nessa, they were robots, like everything you just saw in there was it. There were not a single one of those things was a real animal. They were all robots. I would never in a million, like she thought we were actually sent to space jail when we went on Rise of the Resistance. She thought that the First Order had captured us, right? and because she was terrified, but like it was a manageable level of terror, I was willing to let her like experience that. The dinosaur thing, like she loves dinosaurs so much, I didn't want that to be damaged by this very realistic seeming to her experience.
Exactly. And
that's exactly the kind of thing that you're describing, Maria.
That grown-ups would be having. Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
So I like the sort of different relationships between primary and secondary beliefs here.
And I like that we're showing different reactions.
That's right. So we didn't have enough of that, and that's easy enough to build into that scene. But I think also a little bit of that dialogue in the scene between Galadriel and Ulfang later, to show that like she didn't,
to acknowledge that this did not go entirely according to plan on her part,
and also to allow him to have more of a reason for his distrust. Because it does seem weird that the Emperor can be talked around to this idea, but the general's like, your idea. Like, we know why, but it would be nice if he could tell Galadriel something about why he doesn't trust her very much.
This fairy and drama thing is a headier draft than mortals are typically used to experiencing.
And I think we can play on the folk tales that they already have about elves.
And So, not to kind of move, did we entirely fabricate the thing with him going to Sauron on our own, or was that something that we had been given to do?
We totally made that up.
Okay, all right.
Well,
because
we had talked about the Necromancer.
Oh, I think
right.
No, we talked about it. We talked about it because I remember in the script discussion, it was something we needed to put in here. So we needed to have a reason for them to go there. This was the setup. Like, there was a lot of plot intricacies, and
I was definitely not surprised to visit the Necromancer in the Barrow Downs.
No, we were definitely going to have him somewhere. Just I don't think like them going out to visit him or him coming into the palace had been really
prescribed,
sorted out ahead of time.
Decided to go out to. I think we decided to go out to the Barrow Downs. And then
because I was curious what you thought of that sequence.
So, my very first question: what did the Barrow Downs look like? I'm thinking like probably not shiny new tombs, right? Though that's tempting, but like even then they would already have been old.
They're old, yeah. I mean the guards talk about their ancestors being buried there, but we don't know how far back that is. But
but we're talking about
people who are there are the same cultural people historically.
Right.
But it can't be more than a few centuries old.
No.
Right. I was just going to say it's old in the sense that, so I live in New England. And so in my town, downtown, there's a little cemetery behind the Congregational Church with all of the 200 to 250-year-old graves. Right.
Yeah.
And so you can go and you can see the tombstones that you can barely read, of the people 200, 250 years ago. That's basically what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
we're not talking about a modern person visiting a Neolithic tomb and going, "Wow, this is old."
Right. Exactly.
I think they recognize it as their historical burial ground.
Yeah. It is their cultural heritage. It is not a cultural heritage.
That was my favorite line, by the way, when Ibang was like, "There's nothing to be afraid of here. These are our people." Right. I love that.
Yes.
that was great. Why would anyone be afraid in the Barrow Downs? There's nothing to be afraid of here.
Yeah. Again, it's just sort of continuing to paint Ibang as completely confident in his own domain.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and he's very, oh gosh, there's a term for this that means that no matter what, unflappable. Yeah, but there's a term for someone who, no matter what alternate universe you put them in, they kind of like always feel at home there. And none of this supernatural stuff, like, really. He's a very here, right. Like he's a very. This is the world I live in. Kind of guy.
Grounded.
He's grounded. Yeah. No, that was a really interesting element of his character.
Really, really challenging scene to write as the Rings of Power coming out each week.
Yes.
I had to kind of like compartpartmentalize.
Yes, a lot of, what was funny? This is the first time I've ever had that experience. I mean, after the Jackson films came out, when it becomes hard to not picture like Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, and stuff. I had like while reading the Necromancer scene, like I kept hearing Charlie Vickers' voice.
Yes.
I was imagining Charlie Vickers delivering Sauron's lines, and I was like, oh no! It was the first time that's ever happened with any of the.
To be honest, I don't think that would have happened with season 1 Sauron though. Like season 2 Sauron is much closer to our Sauron.
Yes.
Like, and so I feel like that relationship is much closer this time.
But I really didn't want to be superimposing
the reality is they've just come closer to where we are already,
exactly.
So
they've come alongside us, not the other way around.
It's we're not copying them.
Like the first scene we've had with Sauron since Luthien defeated him.
Yes. And quite honestly, this Sauron, the recently defeated by Luthien Sauron, does feel very much like Rings of Power Sauron.
Is in a similar kind of disempowered
Right.
situation.
Yeah. But to the note of having an actor's voice appear in your head, somebody on Twitter was talking about how weird it was when they read the lines, "Tell me where is Gandalf, for I much desire to speak with him," and they discover in the book that it's Galadriel who says that, not Celeborn, when they keep hearing it in Celeborn's voice, which is so weird because when I think of those lines, I hear them in Cate Blanchett's voice.
Right. Because
even
you've
though she
transposed
never
it.
said that.
Yes.
Because my brain just automatically put it back the way it's supposed to.
Right.
I have heard they're taking the hobbits to Isengard way too many times for me to hear that in any voice other than with like a kazoo in the background.
Yes.
I hear that.
So anyway.
Okay. Necromancer.
And we only have this one scene with Sauron, so we're not really exploring his mental state or anything.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
No, I love that. I thought the thing that I thought was handled best was the unspoken glimpse into the answer to the question, what is Sauron doing now? Right. Answer, continuing his necromantic research, but shifting it, not only shifting it east to avoid the people
Elvish
kicked him out,
entanglements
and Morgoth, right?
Right.
But also because setting up among men, like how he's changed his physical appearance so that he now looks human, and but he's still doing the necromancer thing, and of course, like being known among men as the necromancer was really fun, like as a clear anticipation.
He's tall, but he's not 8 feet tall like he normally is.
So that's why I just gave him eyes that were a bit otherworldly.
Calaquendish,
No, as I say, I thought it was really effective. And of course it was delightful because that scene was told from Ibang's point of view, basically, right? So when we in that scene meet Sauron, we're not meeting him as, we've like done Sauron scenes and we've seen Sauron for many, many years, right? But we're seeing him from the outside, right?
Right.
But yet we, the SilmFilm viewers, can interpret so much more from what Ibang sees than he himself understands, right? So I loved that. I thought that all worked really, really well. The thing, Marie, you've already kind of answered the primary question I had here. And the primary question I had was, why would he do this? Like, why, if you're afraid that your son and heir has been ensorcelled by a foreign spellcaster who has come into your court, why would you then seek remedy for that by taking him to a different foreign sorcerer, also alien to your court, right? Like that you might summon your own magicians to come and solve the problem. Makes sense. Or by contrast, you might bring him to the priests for some ritual of cleansing, right? To purge the pagan magic from him or whatever, right? Like either of those things would make perfect sense. Why the necromancer? So, but Marie, when you were talking about seeking this sort of external confirmation, right? That he is and this I think is particularly useful if what he's also seeking, he himself is still like shaken by the experience to some extent. So what he also would be kind of doing is getting a second opinion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I just not only heard about this, what's going on over there in the West with the elves and with Morgoth, I just lived that. Okay. And I'm trying to sort out, like, it's almost like having, I mean, again, it's going to be almost
someone
like the
else's
experience of having memories implanted in your head is exactly it. Right. Like, I don't even know how to trust what's real, but there's this guy, right, who lives nearby, and like he's a little bit sketchy, but he has something going for him, which is that he's not connected to her and he is from the West, right? And even if he seems of a very different sort of chap than Galadriel, well, that's all to the good. That'll make his input the more independent.
a different perspective.
Right,
So
exactly.
again, like now that we've kind of fiddled with the scene of the ensorcelment with the song, so that we get more of Ibang's actual perspective on it, it will make sense to do some revision of this scene to bring that out of.
Yeah, exactly. If it's not just like I'm bringing him to the witch doctor to have him unensorcelled, right? And more. Again, I'm seeking
the second opinion was
a second opinion. A second opinion.
Yeah. But also this strikes me as a pretty secular culture, in that like
I wasn't surprised that he didn't take him to the priests.
Right, like they've rejected the Morgoth worship of the past in a lot of ways.
Oh, I meant to ask that earlier on, but okay,
we've talked about this.
There are
before.
No relics.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
they came some of the way west, right?
Right.
And, but they've dropped the seeking the light in the west, like that's long forgotten too. So
okay, neither the darkness nor the light.
Yeah. Right.
Gotcha.
So when you describe it as secular, that fits.
Yeah.
Right. Got it.
Because in Tolkien's world, like if you
everybody's secular, right?
Well, no, I was not saying that. I was saying that if you do have a whole cult of priests and such, the first question would be, so they're worshiping Morgoth then.
Right.
So like you have to be a little careful with you can't just have a generic.
Right.
This is our cultural local religion thing. Like it's going to tie into something.
They have denounced the old religion.
Yes.
Is the way I would, or culturally in their
or their
to their minds distant past. Yes.
Exactly. And that is the modern living people. Just it's not part of their culture, a part of their lives anymore.
If they have any kind of, I mean, presumably they have creation stories and they have stories.
Yeah, they have tombs of ancestors, right? It's not.
And there's stuff. Probably maybe there's local spirits that they believe in, or I don't know. But
Sure.
It's not an.
Okay, so
Mrs. Monrique has a suggestion, because in the script it's the Queen that suggests going to visit Sauron, but Mrs. Monrique is suggesting a more lower class person, maybe having like that idea coming from somebody who would be less inclined to be as secular as the leadership and nobility of the city might be.
Well, that's interesting. So here's the way I was thinking of kind of reorienting it a little bit. If it's more of a second opinion thing, right? If it's then they wouldn't exactly be going to him for magic, exactly.
Only,
or not even primarily necessarily, but more like again, more like a sort of a second opinion, right? Like, his son. The problem with his son is that his son needs help being oriented on what's real and what's not real.
Yeah.
Right. The Emperor and the mom, right? Both the Emperor and the Queen have like detached themselves, and they're like, okay, that was her story. Like they're processing it. They've processed that was a secondary world, and they're investing only secondary belief in Galadriel's story. Right.
Right.
The prince is still like completely caught up in that world, and that's their big concern, right? The prince, in their opinion, needs reorienting into what is real and what is not real. Right?
So maybe what Sauron needs to do then is engage in a somewhat less hyperbolic Farian drama of his own, like that focuses more on the vast tracts of unpeopled lands, and yes, there's a war for sure, but it's not. I mean, it's not merely. It's a war. It's not merely a war against good and evil. Like it's.
I think that we can adjust this scene without even doing that much change to it. I think because Sauron doesn't do. I mean, like the scene as I originally wrote it had Sauron doing 0 magic, and then I realized that was like probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Was the next. So I introduced the swirly stuff, and it sort of made him a bit scarier for that. But that's all. That's like he doesn't like disenchant the prince in any overt way.
So I have an idea.
So,
I have an idea of a thing he could do that would actually do double duty within the episode, right? He can explain, not laboriously and boringly, but he can basically explain the Farian drama. Like he can, like, let me tell you about what happened to you. Like, oh, this elf woman came and sang this song. And oh yeah, okay. No.
Well, he does say, that's what elves do.
Right.
He does say
exactly. That's what elves do. And then he can show, so he can do it too. Right. And he can say, look, she was just telling, because again, what the outcome they're looking for is they want their son regrounded. They want him to see through her, see through it in one sense, right? Differentiate between primary and secondary. So he models it, right? He's like, look, let me show you how this works. I'll tell you a story, right? I'll do the same thing. And but he tells them his story, right? Emphasizing his things, right? So he is he's doing double duty because on the one hand,
he's in a way doing what he'll do to Denethor.
Yeah.
Through the Palantir.
Yes. Yeah. So but at the same time, he draws attention to it. He's like, see, I just did that to y'all, right? Just like she did that to y'all. Right. Yeah. So she was telling her story, right? But she was telling it in this way to make you feel like you were there and it was objectively happening. There was nothing objective about that. Look,
the solution still has to be the send Ulfang over the mountains idea.
Yeah.
As
yes, which is where they get there from that. So once that, because one of the things that you had done, Ilana, that surprised me was making it more the prince's idea to like the change, which this would actually facilitate that a little bit more, because it as written, it kind of happened. I'm not 100% clear on what
that, but it
causes that shift.
The shift in the prince was something I was unclear about too.
Right. But
I think if Sauron sort of has explained the inner workings of Farian drama in that way, then the prince can demonstrate that he is more grounded now by
Yes, exactly. But of course, Sauron, he's doing two things at once, right? He's providing this ground. He's helping them to see through what Galadriel did. And the illustration that he's giving, like the way that he's doing it, also tells his own story, right? And plants that
what he wants,
as well. Yes. And he also wants them to send the army. He thinks this is a great idea, right?
Yeah, because he is a. I think that he feels pretty confident he can manipulate that situation to his advantage.
Yeah.
And perhaps once that army is gone, he would have, like, whatever it is that he's doing, like,
I think he's quite happy to empty the lands.
Yeah. Win-win situation.
And he's busy in the Barad. Like, he's setting up shop at this stage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it'll be way easier for him to kind of like completely, if he wanted to, like, it gives him options, right?
Yeah.
It gives him more options to take over this human empire.
He's got also plausible deniability if Morgoth comes knocking and says, "What are you up to?"
Just like, oh yeah, I wasn't up to anything. Oh, but if it works out, then he's also like, oh, and by the way, sorry about that embarrassing dog incident, but I did deliver this big army that like turned this battle in your favor. So that's good. That's what right?
What can I say except you're welcome?
Exactly.
That was the kind of I was thinking of that.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
It was a win for him to have this as an outcome.
Yeah. So one of the things, though, that's also interesting, and I don't know how this would be reflected later on. Ulfang, Ibang, Emperor Ibang, and the Queen, all three of them together, like, break out of and resist, essentially, Galadriel's messaging, right? Whereas the prince, by contrast, does not.
In different ways.
In different ways, sure. Mm-hmm. But the Queen, but Ulfang's experience is different from Ibang and the Queen's in that he did not have the conversation with Sauron, right? Yeah. So they've had this like next layer of Sauron acting upon them, right? And manipulating them in different ways, using some of the same tools that Galadriel was using, right? But Ulfang has not had that. And so his relationship to Galadriel's message is going to be very different from that of the Emperor. And one of the ways in which it seems to me it's going to be more different, when we were talking about Ulfang's resistance to it, he's resistant to it not because he like is convinced that she's bad, but because he's not buying it yet, right? Like he doesn't, it's as you said, Marie, he's not used, like he does not think, he has no experience of ultimate bad guys, right? And he's just assuming that she's playing a game like any other political schemer would be playing games, right? Good soldiers.
Which that he does have experience with.
He does. As a soldier, he knows that the army is always the instrument of these political games, right? Yeah. And he would be evaluating this on that basis. However, but the point is, later on, he can still come around to realize, well, crap, you were right. Like, you did tell the truth. Like, that thing that I was resistant to, that thing that I didn't believe, is actually true. Whereas the Queen and the Emperor are kind of inoculated against that kind of purity of realization that Ulfang can still have, right? Because he did not get Sauron's version of the story embedded into his head in the same way that Galadriel has embedded her version of the story into his head.
And Sauron is going to have far less compunction against shoving his version of the story into their subconscious than would Galadriel.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, he would probably be doing more devious things in addition to just the pure fairy and drama element of what he's doing. Yeah. Okay. So that helps me with my other two, because again, the other two things that I found myself a little resistant to, first was just the like letting him do magic on the air, right? I'm like, why would they be a little more protective, a little more suspicious, right? And protective of their heir than to let like the not totally well-known necromancer dude, do stuff to him. But again, if he's just saying like, oh yeah, she gave a performance. Yeah, here, watch. It's an easy trick. I'll show you. I'll do the same trick to all of y'all. Right. And then he does that. Right. And that it would have the result that they want of breaking the prince out of it. Right.
And get confirmation that, yes, there is a power in the West. That's blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Which supports sending the army out and then having the prince. If the prince, I'm trying to put myself into the psychology of Prince Ibang, which is hard because we know almost nothing about him because he's a very minor character.
Yeah, I mean,
are you about to ask why he doesn't continue to insist that he also go? Is that
no?
Where you're
okay. Basically, the two likeliest outcomes, it seems to me, are A, that, or B, like anger and resentment against Galadriel once he sees through it, once he is led to see through it and feels that he's been manipulated.
I think if Sauron is basically like, she's not lying to you.
Yeah.
Necessarily. She's giving you her point of view.
He confirms, I mean, the scene is written, he confirms there's a power rising in the West. He doesn't say whether it's good or bad. He just like she's not wrong.
Right.
That's happening. and so we can kind of work with that, so that it's not that he's been lied to, but it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And then I mean the realization that he doesn't need, like, I guess the regrounding him means that he starts going, well, maybe like what I should do as the prince is just be the one with, like, can I have the idea, like to see, like that's the way that our kings lead, is we send the armies out, we don't lead the armies out.
Right.
You know that.
Right.
He knows that already. He should know that already. So it's not a, you know, that's not a big thing to come around to for him.
And while he still gets the opportunity to distinguish himself,
gets the credit for the plan.
Yes. And under these circumstances, like under these sort of new circumstances, it's a little bit easier to see him being drawn over into his parents' camp, of like being resistant and thinking, and they're going to be all over pleased, which of course will make it easier for Sauron to interact with them later on, because clearly going and consulting this necromancer guy worked out a treat, right? So like it was perfect.
Yeah, this guy is number one with a bullet to be a thrall of Sauron by the end of his
who the prince? Oh yeah.
Like it's tricky because the emperor, you know, who gets he gets an elvish name at the end of it and all this sort of stuff. Like he's being held as the hero of the hour, but actually, in terms of the story that we're telling this season, once they go over the mountains, we don't really see the Empire again.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then the Easterlings stay in Beleriand, and we presumably are going to tell that story. But
I'm looking forward to, you know, in about 7 years in the Second Age, you know, catching up on like having a, you know, like a human historian who is like retained lore of the fall of the Empire,
it's not that long in the future if you think about it. The War of Wrath, in terms of these guys' histories, it's, you know, like the War of Wrath is not that far in the future, and that's going to cause massive like geological, like, you know, catastrophe.
We should return to the Empire in the War of Wrath.
I think that would be the time to do that. That's going to have but I would imagine the Empire's still there. At that point.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah. No, that's cool.
That's only 100 years down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Not even.
In human terms, it's still a ways down. But no, it's not.
But
that
not
far.
so far that the Empire would have fallen. Yeah.
They have to deal with all these incursions of the elves who wind up taking over Lindon, and
I know. I think there'll be issues.
Yep, there will be. There will be. Okay, so I've we've only discussed one plot, but that was about 90% of what I wanted to talk about anyway. Because concerning the B plot, the Húrin and Morwen plot, I kind of loved it, actually. Like, I thought it worked really, really well. I thought it was the one thing that I think could have been clearer is I could understand. I'm thinking about that when they were not getting along at the beginning. I could understand her point of view. I had a harder time understanding Húrin's point of view. I could understand why Morwen was upset. It was less intuitive to me why Húrin was upset with her.
I think he's upset with her because she's upset with him and he doesn't understand why. That was my feeling. Like, it wasn't that he was
that is an exceptionally frustrating position to be in, for sure.
But like she's gone off at him, and that's his reaction.
Okay.
You know, like
for essentially doing his job.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, so he can't see the point. I actually had a long conversation with my sister who's a youth worker and deals with like generational trauma issues and so on, and about like what the, and I sort of present, she's never read Tolkien and has no interest, but like I presented her with this scenario, and the first thing she thought of was situation in Rwanda, she said, where when the mass killings were happening in Rwanda and women and children were refugeeing out of areas, leaving the menfolk behind who they never saw again. And it was, that kind of a situation.
Yes.
And that the trauma means that people just don't feel safe anywhere and find it really hard to, even when things are calm and peaceful and safe, that they just don't feel safe, and they don't, and the House of Hada have never had that experience. And that's what I was trying to, that's what Húrin doesn't understand.
Yes.
Yeah. At the beginning anyway.
Yeah, no, it was, I felt from the beginning that the dynamics that you were depicting, they were very subtle. Like, this was not like a really obvious, simple kind of misunderstanding, right? This was very much what they were kind of, disconnected on was a very fine distinction. And so in some ways, actually, my feeling like I didn't understand what was wrong, like that is where Húrin is basically at the beginning. Okay. All right. So I was actually closer than I thought to the to the experience. Okay.
He doesn't understand what's triggered this.
Right.
She's walked into him, committing the House of Baor, called the House of Baor. We've got the new House of Baor troops to add to our troops, so all's good. And then she's not even allowed to go with him to talk with Fingern and Maedhros when they go to talk about the Union.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what.
Or isn't invited to.
She's pretty specifically uninvited a couple of times.
Yes.
Yeah, and
she's brushed off.
And we've just seen her hearing the fears of people, who are coming to her in Eldir, about these things. So she's carrying that, and Húrin's just dismissing that. So that's what sets her off.
And the tricky part is that it's like that last element, right, isn't there. Like, the people are fine. Like, everybody's fine except Morwen, right? I mean, and this is what confuses Húrin, right? He's like, are the people of Baor unhappy? Like, they're volunteering. They seem happy. Like, he
goes in and asks how Eldir is, and Morwen completely jumps down his throat. And he's like, I'm just trying to see how things are going. Like, it's not
right.
Obviously she's really sick. I get she's dying. Like, I didn't mean to imply that I didn't know that.
Right.
Yeah. But also, like, he's not thinking what this means for Morwen.
Right. Exactly.
And this is fairly early in their relationship. They've only been married a matter of months at this point, and they didn't exactly have the kind of courtship that allowed them to get to know one another.
Yes.
Right.
So yes, they agreed to get married, and yes, she knows she married the Lord of Dor-lómin, but what that looks like for them, they didn't.
She's not against the war or the Union or anything.
Right. And that's why he's like, did you have a problem with what I did? And she's like, no, I'm just trying to tell you I was supposed to be part of the discussion. That's what I'm mad about. And he's like, would you have told me differently? Like, I don't understand why you needed to be there. Like,
it's I'll tell you, like, it felt like such a human conflict between a husband and wife, because like we've all been there.
I was gonna say, I think like Nick and I are both expressing that we found this relatable this episode. Yes.
And that Morwen is a particularly,
she's a prickly person.
Well, yeah, but she also, like, she is more than happy to express her misgivings and her, like, she is not shy.
Right. Which is why one of the things that Húrin says in frustration is, well, you're going to tell me whether I ask for your advice or not. So why should I even bother asking? You're just going to tell me what I was supposed to have done.
Right.
Like he's clearly like, I don't even know what you want from me, but if I just wait, I'm sure you'll just yell at me some more and then maybe I'll figure it out. I don't know.
And yet
he's trying, because he comes
yes.
to about Emeldir and like,
right. And yet she's also very nonverbal in how she processes her personal problems, right? So like she'll tell him, she will like yell at him about this stuff, but she won't actually explain what's wrong.
Right. She keeps coming after these small transgressions, which to him don't even seem like transgressions.
Yes.
And she's doing it, but in a way she's avoiding the actual core.
What she's doing is showing, I mean, what I'm trying to do in writing scenes for Morwen is setting up somebody who is going to be the leader of Dorloman.
Yes.
The remnant of Dorloman when after the war, and to hold it all together for everyone. Yes. And that's what she's doing for the House of Beor at the moment.
Yes.
She's carrying the trauma of the people. She takes it on herself, and that's a lot. And that's what, that's why she's so intense, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I also couldn't help but think, Ilana, of course, about your thoughts about Morwen and motherhood as well, in anticipation of Morwen's motherhood here. And for people who don't know, Ilana delivered a wonderful paper on Morwen and her motherhood at Osmoot last year. So I know this is something that Ilana's thought about a lot, and very, very interestingly. But anyway, so I was kind of, knowing that you had written the episode, Ilana, I was thinking in advance about the ground also that's being laid not only for her as leader of Dorloman, but for her as mother to her children. And in particular, I was focused on the relationship between her and Emeldir and the way that's going to be shaping her in multiple different kinds of ways. Not only as mother, but especially when she is mother. She's not only a mother, she's a mother in the Emeldir position. That like refugee survivor leadership mode that Emeldir had to be in. And when she finds herself in much more exactly that mode, not only in relationship to the people of Dorloman, but in relationship to her own children as well.
And we've seen her and Emeldir interacting at various times through her life, but it's the last opportunity. So
right. No, it was.
I do like Emeldir stating that she's ready. Like it feels very Beor. It feels very the kings of old.
Yeah, I had the good death.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. No, the House of Beor always get the good deathbed scenes. Like, in fact, they're the ones who tend to die in beds most often. In fact.
Yeah. There's something really interesting there.
Yeah, there is. There is.
Yeah. I mean, Tolkien sort of writes it that way, doesn't he?
Well, the whole like aged wise person dying in bed with wise last words is a total House of Beor thing, right? And whereas like dying gloriously on the battlefield is a House of Hador thing, right?
Yeah.
Those are your choices.
Getting murdered in the woods, I guess, is the House of Olive thing.
Oh, ouch!
I mean, where's the lie?
But it's interesting because the House of Hador and the House of Beor exemplify at my previously stated two really good deaths, right? Like surrounded by the corpses of your enemies and surrounded in bed, surrounded by your children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren.
Right. Yep.
Like that's
Well. Also, I mean, the movement in this episode had to be, the House of what does it mean for the House of Beor and the House of Hador to be united? Because that was talked about in episode 4 when we had the courtship of Húrin and Morwen, the agreement that they would be united. But what does that actually mean?
Right.
What do they bring to each other? And that was what I was trying to work through.
Yeah.
Episode.
Yeah. No, that was my favorite. I loved how that came out at the end, right? We focused in the engagement, the betrothal episode, right? We were focused on them individually, like Húrin and Morwen as the leaders of their people, and what does a union between them mean, right? But what we hadn't really thought through was exactly what you just said, Alana, right? What it means for the people of Beor and the House of Beor and the House of Hador to sort of join together, and what do they each bring, beyond just what do Húrin and Morwen personally bring to that relationship and that kind of co-ruling situation. And
I wanted it not just to be we had different kinds of relationships with elves,
right?
As a cultural, because that was the starting point for the cultural differences between them. So that's where I was sort of bringing in. Well, the House of Beor had their entire lands destroyed in sudden flame in front of them and fled for their lives. That's
the combination between that and they're the vanguard of the search for the light in the West, right? And the way that those two things really come together into the new, Morwen's articulation of the new identity of the House of Beor, right? That they're not merely being subsumed into the House of Hador, which also seemed to be one of the things that she was concerned about that Húrin wasn't getting, right? But anyway,
but Húrin does recognize that.
Yeah,
in the end.
He gets that, and I love how his dialogue acknowledges that, and makes that clear.
And that's why in his final speech he says, "People of Dorloman."
Yes. I was just about to say that. So I really loved Morwen's speech where she kind of takes on the role as spiritual successor to going all the way back to Andreth and Adonel, which she's not done up until this point. She's been perfectly happy to be the successor as far as the administration and leadership. This is the first time that she's accepted that kind of almost a high priestess kind of role. That's not accurate
exactly,
to what's happening. But the wise woman role,
exactly,
for sure.
That's always been a part of it.
And then to see Húrin adopt the concept of the light in the West as now a component of the culture of the people of Dorloman. That was really lovely.
It was. And showing how he gets that and acknowledges that. I mean, it's that more than any, and the way then that Ilana, you were able to kind of make that, calling it a political moment doesn't quite do it justice, but that public moment, let's say that, right? Her public speech and his public response to her speech, which shows that he now finally gets it, and they sort of come together. And after that, you didn't even need to have them making up, there was a little bit of a makeup scene, I know, with the kiss and everything, but still
who knows, maybe.
But the point is they didn't have to even have a separate conversation about their relationship problems. Those were I totally bought that. Once the two of them both were communicating, I mean, there's a sort of irony, right? That their private marital problems were solved by when they were able to talk it out in front of everyone, right?
Yes.
Through public proclamations,
which of course, given the way their relationship works, of course it would.
Of course it would, right? That's what's at stake in any case, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And I love that Húrin's speech is kind of what triggers the re-engagement of the sea plot, which with Maedhros and Fingon kind of feeling satisfied. These people are 100% on board.
Yeah.
we can definitely count on these people.
Yeah.
Which maybe they would not have been as confident in that had the issues between Húrin and Morwen not been resolved.
Right. Yeah. I don't have much to say about the C plot. Of course, there wasn't all that much in the first place, but I do like the mere presence of Fingon and Maedhros served both as an excellent premise. I mean, first of all, it's a really great kind of reminder of the larger overarching plot that's grinding through all of this other more kind of local stuff. But in addition, and of course it serves to kind of kick it off and give it urgency, because like the High King is right there, right? Like he's here, and what are we supposed to do? Anyway, so I kind of liked how that sort of worked, but more even just the coming back, Ilana, to the point that you made earlier, the mere like presence of these elf kings in the midst of all this, providing this like tacit contrast, like it really just kind of drew attention to the human element of this, just because not through anything you had to say, but like the mere fact that we as viewers were invited to sit alongside the elf lords watching these people, right? And before we then shifted around into the very human stuff that's going on there, really gave it a kind of an interesting sort of refreshment of perspective. Just a little overlay of that elvish point of view to remind us to draw our attention more to the very human mortal problems that they were working through.
And I really love that in a story that is about a cosmological fight against evil, that such a critical component is this very human story about a misunderstanding between a husband and wife.
Yes.
Like how much more basic a human story could there possibly be, right? Than two people learning how to live together.
Yes.
Well, I also wrote the Beren and Luthien day after the marriage scene.
Yeah. But which is that's such a different thing. Like that's like the love story for the ages kind of style story.
I still had to work out how to live story.
Oh, sure. But it's
the
these
things
two
that are
people
challenging about the first year of a marriage is that it is two people who were separate figuring out how to be a union, right? No matter who it is, you got to get that part figured out.
Yes.
And until you do, there's going to be some
and we've got a time jump. We've got a time jump now, as Marie said before, to the next episode. Is Turin's going to be a toddler in the next episode.
Right.
So this was the episode we had to establish. We had to kind of set the ground for how Húrin and Morwen actually do start to come to appreciate each other and the start of their actual love story, which is gonna no,
that was really fun. All right. So you see, I had way fewer questions about the B plot than about the A plot. So
I mean, that's essentially what I said like before we had started. I was like, I have like, other than a couple of niggling things at the beginning of the Húrin Morwen story, I have no notes. Like
it was good.
It works out pretty much.
It's definitely easier to write than the Galadriel and Bree.
It's definitely closer to home for sure.
Yes, definitely closer to home. I agree. Awesome. Well, that was wonderful. We should probably let people go as it's getting pretty late now, as usual. But our next session is going to be in 2 weeks on November 14th. And we're moving straight on into episode 6. Right. So we're gonna have just an outline of that one.
Right.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Great. And episode 6, is that the summit?
Yes.
Okay.
That is the beginning of the summit.
The
summit comes in 2 parts.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 6 and 7 will be the summit.
Yeah.
6 and 7. Okay. Great.
Do we remind me? I don't think we have any other scripts planned. Right. I mean, there's still ones that are out there for anybody who's willing to do them. But yeah.
Yeah, we'll see if we have some later in the season.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have assigned episode 10 to myself. Yes. Surprising no one.
Okay. That's the dragon, right?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah, I was
So I'm sure it's a huge shock.
I am shocked to hear that. Yeah. Without thinking too hard, I was able to guess which plot part you were you're claiming there. Okay.
Yeah.
But so, and you guys are doing script discussion of episode 11 on the 22nd, Friday the 22nd.
Yes, that is the plan. Yes, the week before Thanksgiving.
Excellent. Very good.
American Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. Right. Yes. Exactly.
Other people can be thankful whenever they want.
We don't have one of those.
You guys just issue thankfulness entirely. I mean, is it?
We're always thankful.
You always thank. There you go. That's it.
Every day that you don't get bitten by a deadly snake or spider is a day to be thankful in Australia. I'm just teasing.
They're in my garden.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, a bear has walked down my street before. Like,
no, you got your issues.
I was about to say you don't have bears, right?
I was impressed by how terrified of bears Australians are.
There's lots of stories about bears.
Yes.
But no actual bears there.
Yeah.
Right?
We just don't have big
megafauna.
Big mammals. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Just the saltwater crocodiles. Nothing else.
Nothing too great.
No big deal. All right. Well, Ilana, thank you so much for your work. This was a really fun episode. Really appreciate it. That was excellent.
Thank you. It's just a lot of fun.
And thank you for joining us again. Always delightful to have you with us. And we look forward to seeing folks again next time. So thanks everybody for listening, and Godspeed.